I'm Celine Williams, and welcome to the Leading Through Crisis podcast, a conversation series exploring resiliency and leadership in challenging times. My guest today is Illana Burk, leadership educator, business mentor, and host of the Good Business podcast. Welcome, Illana.
Thank you so much, Celine. It's lovely to be here.
I'm very excited to finally talk to you. Illana has put up with a lot of me canceling with my illnesses. I still sound a little bit rough, so I really appreciate your patience. I'm very excited to talk to you today as well.
No problem at all. Ditto. Worth the wait.
You're very kind. As we start this off, I always start with the same question. That is, the name of the podcast is Leading Through Crisis. When you hear that phrase, what comes up for you, or what does that mean to you?
You know, it's a solid question that I've thought about a good bit in watching your other episodes and listening to your other episodes, rather. You know, I think these days leading through crisis is just leading, right? Like that's, you know, I don't actually know any leaders that don't feel like they're kind of in a constant state of crisis. And, you know, leadership in my world can mean a lot of different things. It's I work with very small business owners all the way into bigger businesses and the people that lead them and people that are aspiring leaders. You know, some of my clients are writers and artists, and I think leadership can take on a different definition for everybody when you're thinking about crisis. But I think fundamentally it means approaching your work with a perspective of service. You know, of how can you serve your community best when they're facing the same trials or their own trials that are different from yours. And so for me, I think leading through crisis, it brings up some of the best opportunities to rise to the occasion. And I think that, you know, the most interesting people and the ones that I tend to gravitate towards and work with kind of tend to be in that category of like, I think it can bring out the best in people or the worst in people. And I think the people that are most natural leaders, crisis gives you an opportunity to really guide. And oftentimes it gives you an opportunity to do your best work that leading in, you know, quote unquote, ordinary times, right? If there is even such a thing, doesn't always afford. So.
It's interesting. So thank you for sharing that. There's a few things immediately that come up when you said leading in ordinary times in the air quotes. I was thinking, because you started with like, you know, who's kind of not in crisis and not just leading right now. That right. I think is a really valid point. Like I say often that for me, when I think of crisis, and this is not anyone else, you know, people can disagree. I totally appreciate that. For me, crisis is really any change can be a crisis, because it depends on how we deal with it, what our lens on it is, whatever that case is. And the thing that is constant is change.
Yep.
So it kind of is, it has become, it definitely, in my opinion, is that like, that's just people leading. And
yeah, if you can't hang on to the wheel when things are changing, then you're probably not leading, you're managing. And those are two pretty different things, you know?
Ooh, okay. I love that. I agree with that. I'm curious how you define those differently, because it's really interesting how some folks use that really interchangeably, leading and managing. And for some people, it's a very distinct difference.
Well, you know, for me, I think the difference is, it comes down to skill and desire. You know, managers, those who are managing things, right? They're sort of more in that like category of responsibility. You know, oftentimes they can be in a position to like make sure things are getting done, but they're not necessarily in a position to serve the people who are doing the things, nor do they necessarily have the training or will or desire to guide, nourish, nurture, lift up, or serve the people who are doing the work, you know? Yeah. And when I say doing the work, you know, we're speaking about this in kind of through a corporate lens, but I think a manager requires other people, a leader does not, right? You can lead entirely independently. You can lead a movement, you can lead an idea, you can lead with beautiful artwork and display a sense of community leadership through the way you move through the world without anyone really doing anything underneath you. I think managing managing feels a lot more like a job title. I think leadership is a way of moving through the world. That would be the simplest terms I could come up with for that.
No,
Does that help?
I mean, absolutely. And I love it. And I appreciate you sharing that. I think that I often make a distinction that we manage things, which
Yeah.
often, unfortunately, people put people as things, and we manage the things that people
Right.
are doing, but we're really managing things, whereas we lead people. And that can be leading
Mhm.
ourselves. To your point, it can be leading a movement.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be other people necessarily, but we are leading people in some way. We're leading ideas. It's very
Yeah.
different than managing things. Um, and I think that I love the idea of what you talked about, that a leader, you can be a leader on an individual on their own can be a leader. I think that there's so much of the traditional teachings around leadership are, besides being outdated and written for a very specific audience that is not necessarily the audience we have today,
Mhm.
are very much focused on, you have to have a certain number of followers, and this is how you get the followers, and then this is how you lead them in this really specific way. And I think people still get hung up on that because that's what we're taught.
And it's honestly, I think there's nothing clearer in our culture right now than, I mean, like, look at influencer marketing, right? If there's ever been an example of the fact that like how many people are following you has nothing to do with your leadership skills, I think that's it.
Great
I would not
example.
classify any influencer really at all as being concerned at all about leadership. They're concerned about leveraging influence, and influence and leadership are not the same thing. Influence can be a component of leadership, but I don't think it's you can be an influencer without being a leader. You certainly can't be a leader without having or gathering some level of influence. But that level of influence can happen almost secondarily to whatever is most important about what you're doing. To me, leadership is like, it's a systemic method of gathering power and exerting it in hopefully positive ways. But leadership is, I mean, it's a tool, right? Like it's like a hammer. It can be, in one hand, it can be used to build beautiful things. In another hand, it can be used to bludgeon somebody to death, like fascism is pretty solid leadership, right? Like, it's effective. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing, right?
Right.
So like, but I think leadership is a process of gathering and exerting power in some way. We like to think of power as being kind of a dirty word. Like, especially I think as women, we're sort of trained that like, if you're powerful, it's like a kind of a negative,
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually kind of understand that gathering it is the marker of real leadership, and then using it to buoy the people around you and lift the people that are coming up behind you, that to me, I think, is where real leadership shines, and crisis is the very best moments for it.
Well, and
Yeah.
it's interesting because what you just said links me back to one of the things you said when you were defining leading through crisis, which
Mm-hmm.
is, you brought up the idea of, I was going to say servitude. That's not the word that you used.
Of service, I
Of
think.
service. I know. I was like, that is
That's a whole different
whole
conversation.
different conversation. I know. But being of service. Listen, at least we're real on the pod. If there's nothing else that's true of this podcast, it is, you get to see all the dirty bits of how my brain doesn't work sometimes. Being of service, and that
Yeah.
leaders are, ideally leaders are of service, and
Right.
some of their best
Managers definitely are not. Managers are not concerned about that usually.
Yeah.
I think that's a rarity.
And I wonder, and based on the people that listen to this, the people that consume this podcast, some are in
Mhm.
corporate, some are not, some are business owners, some have a background as, like, they're kind of all over the place. Some are new managers or new leaders, some want to be leaders. There's
Mhm.
not a very specific, this is the one thing that we hit, which is why this is conversational. So
Right.
I'm curious, I say all that context to say, whether it's based on your experience, based on your education, whatever, wherever you want to draw from, what how does someone know, how do you tell if someone is being of service? And I say
Oh,
that,
that is a really good question.
great.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I say that because I think we talk about being of service, and there's all like there's books written about servant leadership, and it's not everyone, there's different definitions. It means different things to different people. And I think it doesn't make it really clear for a lot of people that are out there. And so I'm not saying this is Illana's defining this for everyone, but I'm curious from your experience, how can you tell? What does that look like? How does that show up?
That is seriously, that might be one of the best questions I've ever been asked on a podcast.
Thank you very much.
I love this question. Okay, so one of the I'll answer with an example, right?
Please.
When COVID started, when the pandemic started, I'm a business coach, so I had probably 24 clients at the time, something like that, that were very, tiny independent business owners. And about a third of them had brick and mortar businesses, which, were absolutely dependent on in-person experiences in order to stay alive.
Yeah.
And I also had, the people that listen to my podcast, the people that follow me, I have a lot of brick and mortar people in my greater community, right? Yeah. So that I feel a responsibility to serve and lead. And then when COVID started, it was a parade of shell-shocked fear from my clients, from other business owners, from the people that didn't hire me. It was like I was getting all the questions because I often operate kind of by accident as a bridge point between brick and mortar business and online business. They're two worlds that I know a lot about, that I am very experienced in both. And I am often helping people bridge that gap. So for me, the first thing I did when COVID started was I made as many sessions as possible available to as many people as possible on a pay what you can scale. That was how I could serve my community.
Yeah.
Because people had questions and they needed specific answers that were unique to them, not generalized broad market stuff I could put out on a podcast or stick in a reel or write in a blog post. And that was what I could do with what I had. Right. I had time, I had knowledge, I gave it as freely as I absolutely could. And the first thing that I did with all of those people was to spread that same ethos of service. What could they do for their community to continue to serve their community through that crisis without folding and closing their doors? What was the most that they could offer to keep their business sustainable and help their communities respectively with what they did and what they offered, and managed to keep themselves afloat in the process? And that to me is the best definition of being of service, right? The second thing that I did was I came up with a guide of how to get online fast. And I gave it away to anybody who wanted it. I leveraged my very broad network of being in this business for 20 years. And I sent it out to everybody that I knew and said, send this to your people. And it went far and wide, and you didn't have to give an email address for it. It wasn't a freaking opt-in, right? Like, it wasn't designed for me to get anything from it. There was no barrier to entry whatsoever. It was just, people need this information right now or they're not going to survive this. And so that was what I could do with what I have, right? I think that crisis is the moment where you find out whether or not you are made for this. So to your question of how do I tell? Well, when there's not a crisis in front of us to test people's motivations, when I'm talking to somebody about their work in the world, I think the first things that they talk about are the most telling. If they talk about the impact that they make and how they lift people up and the effect that their work has on other people, that's what should come first. If they tell me their numbers first and how fast they've grown and their pedigree, that's the different type of person. Doesn't necessarily make them like, a bad person, but it gives me a place to direct them if they want to actually learn how to lead in a more balanced way. A lot of times it's just a lack of experience. People do what they've been taught. They follow the leader. They follow whoever was in front of them. They follow whoever said, this is what you should do and this is how you lead. And they just can, it's like monkey see, monkey do. We just continue to mimic until we end up in late stage capitalism. But a lot of people who participate in this market are absolutely willing and able to change the way they do things. They're just not ever invited to.
Right.
So, I look for people who are like, I can tell the difference based on what the impact level is that they want to take, and their respect for whether or not they can do what needs to be done to have the impact that they want to have. In my world, in small business, it's like kind of a joke that people come all the time to business coaches like me, and they're like, I don't want to do Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or whatever social media thing. It's like, it's kind of the lightning rod for caring people don't want to have to sell themselves, but they want to be able to have an impact. Generally speaking, the ones that I think are the most coachable and tend to become the best leaders are the ones who come to me with a baseline of, I understand I'm going to have to do things that stretch me, but that's what I'm going to have to do to meet the needs of my people and my community and to build that community so that I can do the work that I love. Those are the ones that are the born leaders. You can teach it, right? Like, you can help people understand how to make that transition, but I think the born leaders are the ones that walk in with that attitude. So
I appreciate all of that answer.
I think I answered your question somewhere in there.
You did. Absolutely. You absolutely did. And then some, which is a wonderful thing. This is not the question I was going to ask originally, but you just said it and it came to mind in what you were just saying. How important is coachability in leadership, in your opinion?
Oh, that's another good question. I think the answer is that it's really subjective.
Right. Those are by the way, my favorite answers are when it's like, I don't have a good answer for you because it depends. Those are my favorite answers. Tell me more.
It depends, because I think that there are people who are sort of born humble born with the raw materials it takes, so they sort of rise into a sense of leadership naturally. And coachability doesn't necessarily, like, there's sort of like an implied that like everybody could be coached, everybody could do to learn something, but I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think it's really contextual. I'd say a level of being receptive to feedback and growth is a baseline for being able to do good work in the world. I think that's necessary, but I mean, I'm not super coachable. I'll be honest, like, at least not in some areas. Like, I think that's what it depends on, is also like, what are the areas that you're being coached on? There's certainly areas where I'm extremely coachable because I'm very, very aware of what I don't know. So there's like, it's like a cup I want to fill. But like, if somebody comes to me and they want to coach me on my leadership style, I am a wall of resistance. Because it's what I do. It's rare that somebody's going to say something that surprises me, right? This is my, like, for lack of a better way to put this, that feels less buzzy, is like my zone of genius, right? I'm not going to be super coachable in the area where I coach other people. I'm going to probably be a little bit resistant and probably wish that I was a little bit more receptive to other people's input. But, we all have our faults. Right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's important to recognize that you don't know everything and be coachable in the areas where you're deficient, for sure. But I don't think that you have to be coachable as a blanket way of existing in the world, because I think lots of people are doing a great job, and coachability kind of can turn into a stick that they're flogging people with. Like, if you're not coachable, then you're not humble, or you're not effective or something, and it can turn into a weapon in, especially in corporate environments, right? Yeah. That it's like, well, I'm actually just really freaking good at my job. I don't want coaching because I don't feel like I need coaching, and I'm effective. So maybe there's something systemic here. Like, there's just so many layers to that, that there's got to be more context and nuance laid onto that, I think.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I tend to agree. And I think that, I think sometimes what happens probably more times than I would like to see. But I think definitely sometimes what happens is people are, I'm going to use a buzzy term because let's just throw through it, but people have imposter syndrome about things. So they feel like they need to, often women have this, right? Where I need to know more. I need to be better. I don't know all the things in order for me to feel confident in doing what I'm doing. And that we can confuse that with coachability, and it's not it's not the same thing. There's a self-awareness, self-acceptance piece inside of there that's not just coachability. Does that make sense the way I'm saying that?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that we then go, but see how coachable, and I'm using, see, that person's so coachable. Well, that person, there's insecurity, there's other stuff. That's not the same thing as coachability. Because I think, to your point, when you are really confident and you know your stuff, you do tend to be less coachable in those areas. And the thing I would add to that is, when you see people that think they are really good at something, where it is the false sense of confidence, that you're like, you're not hitting your targets, or that thing isn't actually working, but they refuse to hear that or get the feedback. It's like the opposite of coachable. There's a spectrum here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they call that mansplaining, right?
Oh.
At one end of the spectrum is like that, like, let me explain this thing to you that is incredibly apparent in your zone of genius. Let me explain that to you very slowly and repeatedly, because I don't know anything more than what I'm saying to you. Right? There's like, it's coachability. I think it becomes such a weird, like, it gets perverted almost, and can be weaponized so easily, of like, we need to coach them into some leadership skills. And it's like, well, or you need to treat them with respect and give them the power they need to actually do the things that you've asked them to do. Like, I think coaching, especially in leadership environments, has become this, like, almost like a scapegoat for higher leadership to, like, disempower the people underneath them. Like, if they're not effective, it's like a thing you can throw at a problem. Well, let's coach them, right?
Yeah.
And then that person's going, well, that's not actually the problem here. I see all these other problems here that are not being addressed. It's not actually my leadership needs that are the problem here. So, I think that can be marked as resistance a lot. And sometimes it's actually competence.
I agree. I do think coachability is weaponized far too often.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that. I also think it is weaponized to create shame for people, which I absolutely hate when I see that. And I see that a lot. And I'm sure you've seen that with people who have worked with other coaches, because this happens, corporate or not. If you've worked there, right? Like, where that becomes part of it is there's the shame in not being coachable, and they're made to feel a certain way, which I think I really absolutely hate that as well. It doesn't, like, who does it serve when that's what people are walking away with?
Oh God. I've joked for years that I've like gotten the coaching refugees, like, bring me your poor, you're tired, you're huddled masses who have been given really terrible advice. Like, that's been something that I've done for a long, long time, because I think, in the coaching industry, so many people, especially in business and leadership coaching, they take a format, right? Or some sort of prescribed something that they learned, some methodology, and then they slap a price tag on it and sell it like crazy for oftentimes an insanely high amount of money. And none of it takes any of the context and nuance of the person or the business's actual situation into account. They are just teaching, like, they're broadcasting essentially, right? Like, they're broadcasting ideas on top of things, and you have to do this, you must do that, you have to follow these particular steps, or you're never going to be successful. And then it becomes like, well, you're just uncoachable if they don't want to do it, when actually that person's experiencing like some legitimate resistance and intuitive reaction to somebody telling them they're doing things, that they should be doing things that don't apply to their unique situation.
Right.
You know, as far as I'm concerned, like real coaching, especially leadership coaching, has to take into consideration so much more than goals. Goals are
Absolutely.
like, they're I mean, I barely even do goal setting with clients. Like it's not like the outcome is almost secondary to how we get there, because how we get
Right.
there is so much more important. It's like, you know, I look at goals a lot like business plans. You know, in business school it's like everybody jokes that like the only place that a business plan goes after the bank is the circular file, because it's the same thing with a lot of like systemic type coaching. You know, we're going to have someone come in and they do XYZ acronym coaching, you know, and then they just do that. Well, you don't even know if that's what you needed. That's just somebody, you know, in a leadership meeting when, hey, we should hire somebody to help us do XYZ, right? Without any kind of prescriptive evaluation of like what's actually going on. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, in our chat before we
Yeah.
hit record, and
Yep.
we were talking about what you do, of like that there's a lot of evaluative components to doing good work. You have to
Yes.
understand the lay of the land before you
Hmm.
can do good work, whether you're
Yep.
coaching one-on-one or systemically across an organization. If you want to change the culture of any ecosystem, whether it's the C-suite or the individual, you know, life coach who wants to get her first website up that I'm working with, you know, I work with people at all those levels because I think
Yes.
that good leadership and good skills proliferate at any level.
Yeah.
And you have to understand what you're dealing with. You have to take inventory. You have to understand what your resources are. Like there's just so much more to it than just prescriptive garbage, you know? Because what that leaves is people feel terrible because they weren't
Yes.
able to get the outcomes they thought they were going to get because it was wrong for them to start with. But they
Right.
don't know that, you know? And unless you have somebody who's like relatively experienced and has perspective at the wheel, then you're going to leave things worse than you found them because it was you know, you were putting a band-aid on a hole in the dam, or
Yeah.
you know, or giving people just the completely wrong solution because you never bothered to figure out and understand the systemic issues at play to understand the problem.
Yeah.
So
It's, I think, look, the reality is that I think you'll appreciate when I say this. It is so much easier to create a program and say, this is the way everything works, and everyone goes through the program and it's going to be perfect. And I'm just going to sell this program the exact way it is. And if you don't make it through, it doesn't give you what I'm promising you it's going to give you, that's your problem. That's not me,
yeah.
that's you. It is much easier from a scalability, from a repeatability, from all of that. And it is it results in all these buzzy things that are meaningless that people will
Mm-hmm.
then say about what's not working or about what's wrong with someone. Oh, well, you know, you need to improve your funnels. Okay,
Yeah.
great. I mean, theoretically, sure, lots of people probably do need to improve their funnels. But
Mm-hmm.
just to say that is completely meaningless to a business owner. The same way to say to someone, well, your leadership skills need to be improved. You have to work on your executive presence. It's just as meaningless to say you have to work on your. We create these things that we blanket statement that
Yeah.
are easy to sell. Well, we're going to work on executive presence. Great. We're going to work on funnels. Great. We're going to like check the box because that's what someone has said. But
Right.
actually, there's so much nuance and context inside of
Yeah.
any. They're actually meaningless when we think about a lot of this stuff.
Uh-huh. Yeah, my first question would be like, well, maybe we should talk about what an actual funnel even is.
Sure. Right.
Like,
Great
like
starting point.
can we talk about that? That could be a whole other episode of me going off about why funnels are the worst thing ever. It's like just the concept, right? You're to like set your people, the people you want to serve that you say you want to help. You're going to sit them on the edge of a funnel. And like literally the clip art graphics you find on the internet, on Wikipedia even, right? And then you're going to shove them headfirst into a funnel. And then you're going to squeeze as much money out of them as you possibly can until they pop out the bottom with nothing.
Yep.
That is not being of service. Right? To
It is
anything but
not.
your bank account. That's not leadership. That's
Yep.
manipulation. It just is.
Yep.
It's a really nice, polite way of saying that, you know, you're going to just squeeze them for everything that they're worth. There's no conversation about service in there. So, I mean, I know that's not really the topic here, but it's more so like that's illustrative of how we
Yes.
ask these prescriptive questions, but we don't ask the right questions. Like, you need to improve your funnel. Well, maybe you don't need a funnel. Like, that's the right question. Maybe the funnel is, maybe that was the freaking problem to begin with, right? It's, you need to improve your executive presence. Well, why? Why is that a problem? And what would that look like if you improved it? Is it you look better in a suit? You can walk better in heels? Like, what? How do you improve your executive presence, right?
What is executive presence? How about that? What is it?
Maybe we need to redefine how we view and understand leadership in the ecosystem of our whole organization, instead of telling people that the way that they're functioning and moving through the world is fundamentally wrong in some way. Maybe the ecosystem's wrong. Maybe we challenge ourselves to chew on bigger problems.
Yes. It's context and nuance and better questions. Like, imagine the world we'd live in if all of these things.
Oh, imagine.
Right.
Yeah, you know, people ask me like why I work with like very small business owners, like because of my experience. And I definitely, I could do bigger things if I wanted to. I could work with organizations if I wanted to. I have, but I think for me, it's the question of scalability is fundamentally sort of broken, right?
Amen.
Like, I know lots of people who have very big businesses and very broad reach and have focused entirely on reach and bigness and external, you know, visibility, right? But their impact is quiet, right? Their impact is like, okay, so you've helped a whole lot of people do something really small and relatively insignificant. That's the way that we think about scalability, is about financial growth and broad market appeal, broad market impact. That's what scalability means. But I've helped, you know, I went back and counted, and I've probably worked with around 400 people by now in my business, mostly one-on-one. And the ripple effect that I see over time is far more profound. That's how I view scalability, which to me is how I define leadership. Underneath it all is like, the impact that I want to have is that people answer questions in a different way. When they're faced with new challenges, they think about it in a different way as a result of working with me, right? That they move through the world making decisions from a more inquisitive and more holistic standpoint. And that scales big time, because that's how they teach. It's how they do their work in the world, right? That's what scalability really means as far as I'm concerned. So when we think about leadership, you know, leaders don't always have the opportunity to see the impact that they make. And that's the truth of it, right? Can you be okay with that? Can you get okay with not actually visibly seeing the impact of your work? And I think fundamentally corporate environments are not calibrated for that. They're not calibrated to have invisible successes. They don't, because they can't quantify it on a balance sheet. They can't talk about it at a quarterly meeting. And that's why I do the work that I do, because individuals are much more comfortable with invisible impact and nuance.
Absolutely.
And that feels far more impactful. That's how I scale, is I focus individually and I make sure that each person that I work with is leaving with more skills, like real skills, that changes how they do their work and changes how they do business forever. And that feels like a whole different kind of thing.
Yeah. You know? I think that's incredible. And I think the fact that you have that clarity is, a lot of people don't have that clarity. You know, I've worked with a number of smaller businesses and startups, and they become a lot of them, I'm not saying everyone, but there's this hyper focus on, you know, this many people on an email list or on a whatever, and then growing to have this many people in the organization, and then growing to hit this idea of growth, which is not scalable, and it's completely arbitrary numbers and metrics that they're pulling from. Why is the size of why is having 200 people in your organization better than having 5 people if the impact that those 5 people have, or the, you know, profitability or whatever your thing is higher at that? Not like what, but we get stuck on we get stuck on these external ideas. And I think,
Yeah.
what I hear you talk about is that by helping people question and shift and figure out what's best for them and their business, it does, you get to have an impact, and then they get to have an impact. That's real.
Which is, organizations, like, it's amazing how, big companies can systemically forget that they have incredible amounts of power to have a positive impact. But if you remind them and show them the ways that they can wield that power, they do. And they do it well, they do it sustainably, and they do good things in the world. But, we have free market capitalism that says you have to pay attention to the needs of your shareholders before anything else. And those things end up being mutually exclusive, and that trickles down. It just does,
Yeah,
it's like, I like to think about these things like the 3 terms in the same conversation, and it's scalability, sustainability, and stewardship. If you're considering those 3 things as being 3 sides of a triangle, then it changes the way that you do business. Because if you think about scalability in a vacuum, then it does what we just described, right? It's bigger, bigger, better, more, faster, stronger, bigger, more visibility, and you win. But do you?
What do you win?
You may or may not have sustainability. What does sustainability look like? And I'm not talking about just environmental sustainability, but all sustainability. Like, are you functioning in a way that you can continue to flourish indefinitely? Which is an amazing thing to aspire to. But what's even better than that is stewardship. Are you actually enriching the ground you stand on? Right? If you are, you might not actually get to see the ways that you're scaling, because that it happens under your feet. It's quieter, it's subtler. It's, some employee 20 years from now talking about one of the managers at your company that they had when they were in their very first internship, and what an impact that person made because of the culture you created in your company.
Yes.
That's not quantifiable. That's just like good peopling.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to teach, and it's a lot harder to learn, and it's definitely harder to market.
Yeah. Isn't that always the case?
Isn't that always the case?
Yeah. We could keep talking, and I'm going to be mindful of your time. And I'm going to ask the question is there anything that we didn't get to that you wanted to bring up, or something you want to emphasize? Or you can also say, I'm actually really good. I feel like I got to everything. I said everything that I wanted to say before we wrap this up.
I love that. I really enjoy that you ask hard questions. So that's nice. Like, it's really fun to be able to say a lot of the stuff that's, this is big thinky stuff that doesn't often come up on leadership podcasts. And so it's fun to chew on that in the context of both entrepreneurship and bigger business. And thinking about the ways that individual human beings can become leaders is really powerful. And so I would just say that would be my final thought, is like, it's nice to be able to have that conversation. I'm glad you're having it.
Well,
so
thank you. I appreciate you having the conversation with me. This was lovely. I really enjoyed our time together. I appreciate you sharing and being so open and playing with me in the space. That's always the best. These are always the best episodes. So thank you so much, Illana. It's much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Celine.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me today on the Leading Through Crisis podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a minute to rate and review us on your podcast app. If you're interested in learning more about any of our guests, you can find us online at www.leadingthroughcrisis.ca.